Okay, I'm trying ESO again, and I've come up with a build that I feel is effective enough. It's not the most effective, and it is very accessible to people who want to try PvP for the first time but don't want to be like a melee player where they're going to get dumpstered immediately. What I've come up with here is a sort of archer build. This isn't the first one I've made. The one in the past was more like playing a Magblade, where it used a two-hander as the resto staff for rally healing, and then a bow as the main bar for kind of like the ranged Magblade playstyle. Now, this follows a similar line, but with the hybrid changes, I can now use a burst heal that is not rally, and so I've done double bow. This is probably one of the stupidest, but also one of the most fun things I've done. It is just effective enough that I can make kills with it, but you're probably not going to kill any Dragonite who knows what they're doing. I've killed Wardens with it, even Wardens who know what they're doing, but in Cyrodiil, this build is not great for solo play. In Battlegrounds, though, this thing will absolutely tear. So I highly suggest, if you are going to play this build, it's more Battleground oriented, or at least maybe no CP Cyrodiil. If you want to take it out in Cyrodiil, I would switch out the Ring of Fire set, or the Way of Fire set, to Rallying Cry, and then duo with a friend. I don't suggest trying to play this game, or this build solo, because it doesn't quite have the staying power to keep people off of you, even if you can create distance. Currently, Dragonites are a little oppressive, so good luck there. However, in Battlegrounds, this build is tons of fun. It's fast, it's got a lot of damage, a lot of bursty damage, it's got plenty of range, and I'd say it's also pretty customizable. The best part of this build, in my opinion, is that it will teach you to play Nightblade. Both melee and ranged Nightblade, because of this one skill here, Shadow Image. Shadow Image is a very important skill. It will allow you to get away, more effective than Cloak in many cases. In fact, there will be times where I don't even slot Cloak in favor, I'll just slot Shadow Image instead. Now, Shadow Image is essentially a mark and recall ability. So let's say I'm fighting over here in this lovely little enchanted garden. My opponent's here, he's beating me up, it's too much. Well, assuming that I've put my shade somewhere else, preferably around a corner, I can just port to the shade and run away. That will instantly create about, I think it's 22-ish meters? 22 meters of distance, give or take, and allow you to get away much easier. Furthermore, shade also applies Minor Maim, which will reduce the reduce the damage of your enemy by 5 seconds, or reduce the damage of your enemy by 5% for 4 seconds. It does a little bit of damage, but that's not the reason we're using this. However, the little bit of pressure that it provides is nice. Now, as for the kind of customizability of the bars here, we're going to look at what we're using. So I am using In-Cap Strike on the front bar due to the sustain passive it offers. You can totally use other things like Dawnbreaker there for the extra weapon damage, or you can put Toxic Barrage there because usually you want to have your Killing Blow ultimate on your front bar. But I'll talk about Toxic Barrage in a second. Magnum Shot, you could use Draining Shot if you're struggling with healing, but I find the stun and the distance this creates to be much more desirable. Concealed Weapon it's meta now. Like, you can't get around this. The unique damage passive that it offers is very desirable, and the Minor Expedition it offers while slotted is really nice for a ranged build because it allows us to get around faster. And given that you get the damage passive when you leave Sneak or Major Expedition, it's pretty helpful for this build, even if you aren't using Cloak, because the second you dodge, you now have Major Expedition, as long as you're using a bow. So with that in mind, this skill is pretty helpful. If you do PvE and you're using the other morph, the Stamina morph, and you don't have access to this, then you can always take the Fighters Guild skill, Camouflage Hunter, and slot it here instead. This will give you the Savagery and Prophecy buff, so you don't have to worry about crit potions quite as much, and you can bring other Nightblades out of stealth as well. Furthermore, you get Minor Berserk for 4 seconds after you deal crit damage at an enemy's flank, and given we're Nightblade, we usually have pretty good crit. This is kind of your bread and butter burst skill, Merciless Resolve. You can use Assassin's Scourge or the other morph of this, but the Magicka morph does more damage and does more healing if you happen to be in melee range, so it's generally recommended that you take this morph instead. As for Lethal Arrow, so I actually kind of went back and forth on which spammable to use. Silver Shards is okay. As you see here, Silver Shards does less damage tooltip-wise. The AoE damage is nice, but it also has less of a cast time. Also, Slayer increases your weapon and spell damage by 3% for each fighter's guild ability slotted. We would get extra weapon damage, but is it worth that 3% extra weapon damage, even though this thing does less damage? I don't know. That's up to you to decide. I use Lethal Arrow, and I will tell you why. Lethal Arrow may have a cast time, but it also has a very long range, and given the cast time and its stamina cost, it's a pretty decent skill to just sit there and use. But this right here is probably the biggest reason I use it. With the bow equipped, dealing damage with a light or heavy attack increases the damage of your bow abilities by 5% for 5 seconds, stacking up to 5 times. That's 25% extra damage. You can increase your damage of Lethal Arrow by 25%. Now, this does require you to be in combat, but because I'm not playing this as a ganker, you're going to be using light attacks a lot, because you have to weave your attacks with your Lethal Arrow, which is actually easier than it used to be for some reason. So you should have a pretty decent uptime on Hawkeye. You should at the very least be having the 5 or 10% upgrade to your damage rather than the 25%, because, you know, PvP is messy. Sometimes you get interrupted and you can't make the light attacks to keep the buff up, but you should usually have at least 5 or 10% more damage. This is why I don't use Crushing Weapon or any other spammable, really. Like, I considered using Strife because I was struggling with healing. Just having that passive healing can help you not die from dots all over the place, and I feel like that is a problem. Ever since Rally lost its heal over time, you're going to struggle against damage over time effects. But overall, the main goal of this build is to kind of like stay away from your opponent, to outplay them. I feel like this build is excellent for teaching people how to outplay their opponents because it gives you all the skills you need. It's fast. It has acceptable healing. I wouldn't say it's amazing healing. It has decent sustain, and, well, it has fairly decent damage too. Now, as for the food and the potions that we're using, I'm just using PvE weapon power potions. That's what I use on Magicka Nightblade, it's what I use on this Nightblade. If you wanted to use Camouflage Hunter, like you're making that commitment, you can use Essence of Weapon Crit potions, or not Essence of Weapon Crit, weapon power, and then maybe stamina regen and then magicka regen, but you don't have to do that per se. Now onto the backbar. I don't actually have access to any mythics yet, so that's another way that this build is kind of beginner friendly, is that if you don't have mythics, this will work for you. So we're using Master's Bow on the backbar, which can be easy, cannot be easy, but you can also just put another bow of fire on the backbar. It's a pretty basic setup. Basically, this is supposed to be powered, but I have mine as Nirnhoned from when I used it a long time ago, so this is Nirnhoned. However, because it's Nirnhoned, I feel comfortable putting Toxic Barrage on my back bar. This will allow me to do more damage, even though my front bar is sharpened, which is kind of better, but Nirnhoned will also increase the power of my healing, so it's probably the next best thing to powered. You could also take defending, but I'm going to go with Nirnhoned or powered. So because I have Nirnhoned on the back bar, I will use Toxic Barrage on the back bar rather than the front bar, which has incap. I keep incap for the sustain passive more than anything else, not just because it allows me to restore my magicka, but because it allows me to restore my off resource, which is magicka. Did I say magicka? Whatever. It allows you to restore both magicka and stamina. That is the important part, especially because you're going to be using magicka for your burst heal and for cloak. As for the back bar, you have Leeching Strikes. In CP, I sometimes take this off because it's usually easier to sustain in CP, and I'll switch it out with something else. This is kind of a flex spot, but if you're using this for what it's intended as, which is, battlegrounds and playing with a friend, playing with support, with someone who will take pressure off of you, then you don't necessarily need this. You could switch it out with Arrow Spray, I guess. You could switch it out with any other number of skills. Resolving Vigor is mandatory for PvP. I don't care if you're Magicka or Stamina. This is mandatory now because of the minor resolve buff that it gives. Healthy Offering. I played around with Shrewd Offering a little as well, because the cost, not because of the health cost, but because of the Magicka cost. And I honestly just kind of came to the conclusion that the cost offset wasn't that big of a deal, so I just went to Healthy Offering instead, and that gives you Minor Mending, which increases your healing done by 8%. In PvE, it does not matter quite as much the potency of your heals in such a way, but because Battle Spirit will reduce the potency of your heals, potency does matter far more. Poison Injection. Honestly, this is just a nice little damage over time that has a execute mechanic, but it also is mainly used just to proc our Master's Bow. Master's Bow will give us more damage on a target. Cloak. It's Cloak. What more do I need to say? You can use this to get away, you can use this to kind of stalk a target, you can use this to proc your concealed weapon. There's a lot of different ways that you can actively or inactively use it. I think that more or less covers everything for the actual active skills. For passives, honestly, just take everything. Don't skimp on passives. What I often say is that if it affects combat, use it, or take it, which is why I've taken literally all the heavy armor passives, taken the Fighters Guild passive, even though I don't always slot Fighters Guild stuff, because sometimes I do. You always want to have, not Undaunted Command, Undaunted Metal here. This will give you, it's free extra stats. There's no reason not to take it. As for Alliance War, you want to take... I only recently got these skill points, so I should probably take these. You want Resolving Vigor, and you want all of these. Now, as for support, you don't need this one, but you should probably take these two because they will be beneficial more times than not. As for racial, we should probably talk about race, shouldn't we? So, I choose to play a Bosmer because I think they're cute. I like their lore. I like how they look. I like Bosmer. Optimally, the builds or the races that you would want to take for this build are probably like Khajiit, even Dunmer. Most of the meta races would be good for this build. Bosmer is in kind of a weird place because it only offers stamina sustain, and it only offers stamina as max stats. And in a hybrid environment, that's not really as desirable as, say, Khajiit, which offers literally all 3 stats and all 3 regeneration. As for Dunmer, it offers weapon and spell damage, but it also offers Magicka and max stamina. So even a Dunmer is more desirable than a Bosmer in some cases. But the sheer amount of stamina sustain that Wood Elf gives you is honestly really, really nice. I can do a lot of dodge rolling without having to worry about my stamina pool quite as much. This is also kind of nice, a little bit of extra disease and poison resistance. I find that every now and then I'll run into someone who's using a similar build and they're just spamming snipe. Having that little bit of poison resistance is kind of nice. But this is probably the biggest reason why Wood Elf isn't complete dog poop. Increased movement speed, and you get extra spell and physical penetration. Penetration is really good in PvP. In PvE, from what I've heard, is that people over-penetrate all the time nowadays, but in PvP, you often have to make your own penetration. You can't really rely on others to penetrate things. I'm saying penetrate a lot, it's a little weird, but that 5% extra speed is really nice too, for reasons that I will kind of show you now. I currently have the wrong traits on these rings. I have all healthy because that's what it came with and I don't have enough transmutes. Optimally, you should have 1 as infused, minimum 1. 1 as swift. You should probably have 2 as swift, but if you really want to squeeze more damage out, you can switch 1 to infused and do an infused weapon damage enchant. I like to do infused stamina recovery enchant, but given I am playing a Bosmer, I might switch that out for an infused damage enchant. Now, I do want to bring up something a little bit more specific. We are relying on Magicka to give us our burst heal, and Wood Elf is a primarily stamina race. So how do we manage that? Well, we could put more light armor on, sure, but that would make us more squishy. If anything, we should be probably wearing medium armor, because that'll make us slightly less squishy. What I recommend doing is that instead of using a increase weapon harm or increase like martial damage, make a increased magic damage enchant, because the increased magic damage enchant will give you that 10% or that 10 extra magicka recovery. Put 2 of those on, that's 20. Then that 20 will be multiplied by whatever light armor modifiers you're wearing. It's not that much, but when you're really struggling for magic, it's noticeable. And given we have enough stamina sustain, it's not that much of a detriment. I have considered using a tri-regen glyph, like an infused tri-regen glyph, but I don't have the resources to acquire that at the moment, given I only started playing again recently. So you can try that if you want to. As for the sets we are running, we have Balrog, which is honestly just the Nightblade set, not just because it pairs well with your burst, but because it looks Nightbladey as well. You know, it makes your hands red, and Nightblade abilities also make your hands red. So aesthetically and mechanically, it's a perfect set for Nightblades, and I have used it ever since it came out. Now, as for the main set, I am using kind of Night Mother's Gaze, which used to apply a unique resistance debuff, but now it just applies Major Breach. Because we are lacking Major Breach, you know, we're not using a Resto Staff, we're not, you know, poking people with a sword and board, I've found that this is actually pretty useful. I even use it on my Magicka Nightblade, who is using Night Mother and Rallying Cry, and if she's in a group, I have her use Transmutation, because Transmutation is honestly an underrated set, because no one is using critical resistance nowadays, and so having critical resistance is really nice. Overall, the weight of this is kind of up to you. Because I tend to be dumb and charge into things headfirst, I have 2 reinforced pieces, legs and a chest. Those are both heavy. Don't do reinforced unless you're using heavy armor, because in most cases it's just not worth it. As for my helmet, I have heavy, so that's 3 pieces of heavy, and all of them have tri-stat enchants, and those are the main 3 pieces, the chest, the head, and the legs. You could do, I have actually considered switching the heavy legs out for medium, because, you know, medium's nice. But overall, I'm doing 3-2-2 rather than 5-1-1 or anything other than that. 5-1-1, if you don't know, references 5 of your main armor and then 1 of the other 2 armors, so that you can get the Undaunted Metal passive proc for you, which gives you 3 max stats. Moving back here, so Balrog is essentially when you use an ultimate, you're going to get a bunch of damage and penetration. Overall, that's just very helpful for Nightblade, especially when it comes to bursting your enemies down. In cap, it's really helpful for in cap, but since we're mostly going to be using Toxic Barrage to score kills, then it's also really helpful there. What I do to score kills is often I will either just use Toxic Barrage and use that additional pressure to just snipe spam them to death, or if they're a very competent player or they have purges, I will usually charge up my Merciless after a couple light attacks and, you know, snipe spamming. I will hit them with Magnum Shot, and then I will hit them with Merciless, which is very hard-hitting ability. And since they're in that stun, they're going to have a hard time avoiding that Merciless, and then hit them with Toxic Barrage, which should either finish them or, you know, maybe they're almost already dead. So if they're almost already dead, don't waste the Toxic Barrage, but if you need to secure that kill, use Toxic Barrage to secure the kill. Toxic Barrage is also a great way to drain an enemy's resources, because it just applies a bunch of counter pressure. So they're either going to be dodging, and it takes like 3 dodges to really dodge the entire thing, and at that point you're going to have the stacking dodge cost, and I already drained like almost 7k of my stamina doing that. If you're a Magicka build and you don't have that much stamina, that's going to be possibly more than your stamina, or more than half of your stamina pool, possibly less than half, but might be around the halfway point. But it is a great way to secure kills, either by doing damage or by draining your enemy's resources. If you don't want to use Night Mother's Gaze, you could use one of the crit damage sets. Hunting's Rage is always just a set that I've enjoyed, but you probably want to have more penetration. So the Ring of Fire, you know, cue the Johnny Cash song, this is a proc set, and I don't know how I feel about it, to be honest. I've used Shackle Breaker, I've used Hunting's in this piece, but Way of Fire just seems to be the best option, and it's mostly because I'm playing a off-meta build. Usually, I don't like using proc sets. They're cheesy, they don't feel good to play against, and even using them, they don't feel that good because you're not securing the kill, your proc set is. But I feel like this doesn't do enough damage to actually do kills, and it will merely apply additional pressure in a shorter amount of time, more damage, less GCD. So I recommend using it, I guess. The enchantment I have for this weapon is Charged, and on the back bar it is the increased weapon and spell damage enchantment. Charged will give you minor vulnerability, that's why we use it. As for other additional sets you could use in addition to Night Mothers or whatever, honestly, I would just go with Way of Fire. You could use Red Mountain, that also does some damage. I used to have a build where I used Viper Sting and another set that came from Craglorn, so you could do that. But overall, I would just suggest going with this. The pieces are pretty cheap, all things considered. And then you have this one crafted set, so you can customize your armor weights as well. One thing to note here, this is kind of the stat distribution that I came up with. My health is too high, but that's not because of my stat distribution, it's more because I'm using healthy rings, and these rings should not be healthy. I just don't have the transmute geos to change those yet, so keep that in mind. Otherwise, I believe we've covered everything. As I said, this build is mostly for battlegrounds or duoing with a friend, and so CP isn't that big of a deal. But if you want, we can go take a look at CP. Fortified. This is just really nice. Extra damage mitigation, go for it. Rejuvenation. There are better things to use, like Survival Instincts? Yeah, Survival Instincts is a great one to use that I would probably use in place of Rejuvenation, but I like having that little bit of extra sustain, especially for my off resource. Celerity, move speed. Given I'm playing a Bosmer, move speed is great. Just stack all that move speed, make me fast as fuck, boys. Other than that, Relentless is also nice for avoiding burst. So like if you get fossilized by a Dragonite, God forbid, at that point you're basically already dead. Not necessarily. But if you get fossilized and then they leap you, the second you're fossilized, you're going to get that major protection, which reduces your damage taken by 10%. That used to be more than that. Oh my god. That used to be like 30% damage reduction. Now it's only 10. Basically, that 10% extra damage reduction can help avoid you from being absolutely bursted down. I'm mostly just using this because I'm still getting back into the feel of the game, and eventually I'm probably going to take this off and pick something like Pain's Refuge, or where's Pain's Refuge? Around here somewhere. I don't know. Regardless, Survival Instincts is also a really good one because it decreases your cost of blocking and dodging, and those are very important skills. Oh, also sprinting, but most of the time when you're under pressure, you're going to be blocking and dodging a little bit more than sprinting. Although, with this build, I do a fair amount of sprinting to get away, so like what I'll do is I'll put a shade down, dodge roll to get that speed buff, run a little, and then after I'm a distant ways away, port back, and then shoot them from behind, because that tends to disorient people. As for food, I am just using Dubious Chloranthorum because I'm lazy and I haven't updated my build since Morrowind. But there's like the Lava Foot Soup. That's also a good option, although if you're going to do that, you might want to put more points into health, because this does give you a little extra max health. But overall, you don't need to use this. I'm just using it because it fits with what I have. You can make these adjustments on your own. And honestly, that's a big part of PvP builds. In PvE, a lot of it is cookie cutter because this is going to give you the best damage and the best effectiveness. But in PvP, you are going to have to make your own decisions because these things are customized. If you suck at remembering to use Cloak, maybe you should just take Cloak off. That's okay. You don't have to do this. You can take Cloak off. I'm sure a lot of people would appreciate it if you took Cloak off, because Cloak can be kind of annoying to fight against. If you want more healing and you're okay with the magic cost, you could put Refreshing Path out. Refreshing Path is one of my favorite abilities. It has always been one of my favorite abilities. Although when I fell in love with it, it actually did damage, and I kind of wish it did damage, because then I could use it to bring Nightblades out of stealth, but it doesn't have to do that much damage. Regardless, it gives you a sustain increase as well as healing and major expedition. Now, with this build, we already have plenty of major expedition, so that's not really that important, but the sustain and the healing it offers is quite nice. As I said, having that small heal over time can help relieve the pressure of when people put a bunch of dots on you. That can get very annoying. If you really, really want to, you could have this damage over time effect on your bar. I would suggest taking the one that gives you Magicka Steel, because that way you can use Cloak more often, or you can use Shade or Healthy Offering. There are a bunch of different options that you can take. You can even do Shuffle if you're doing 5 light pieces. Given that this character is already really fast, I haven't felt the need for snare removal, but it is there if you feel the need for snare removal. If you are a new player to Nightblade or to the game in general, and you just, you wanted to pick up something that's fairly accessible, but, you don't have any mythics, this is perfect build for you. My suggestion is that you focus on learning how to use Shade properly. If you do that, you will learn how to play this build and other Nightblade builds, and you'll be able to dominate. If you've ever wanted to get into 1vx, Shade is probably one of the best skills to help you do it. Shade and Streak. If you don't like Shade and you want to play a vampire and use Elusive Mist, you can do that too. But Shade is love. Shade is life. No shade to all the other skills, pun fully intended. Otherwise, you also want to focus on light attacking. You can't play Nightblade without light attack weaving. I'm sorry if you hate animation canceling, but light attacking is just a big part of the game, unless you're doing a heavy attack build, and this is not a heavy attack build. I wish you luck. I hope you have fun. Let me know in the comments if you have any questions, and if you want to see me play this build in-game, then go over to my Twitch, and if I'm streaming, you can just ask me to switch over to it, and chances are I will switch over to this character if I am not already playing it. Thank you for watching, and I hope you all have a wonderful day.